panelists. Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Scott?
I'm here as well.
And Sue?
I didn't, yeah, Sue is here, is muted.
I'm here. I'm
All
here.
right, Sue. All right,
Oh,
perfect.
sorry.
Just wanted to make sure that we got the quorum and you guys are ready to take on the next, last but not the least, session. So welcome back, everybody. Truly, it's a great pleasure to have our panel talk about the post-COVID outlook on higher education, right? Specifically focusing on supply chain programs. So it is my pleasure to have Elaine kick us off. And Elaine, stage is yours.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Elaine Singleton. Nice to meet everybody. And thank you, Nick. I just recently relocated to Florida a year ago, right before the pandemic went into full swing, and relocated from Southern California. So I went from one hot spot to another. But it's been a great road. It's been a great journey. And I was in industry for about 35 years, worked for the Walt Disney Company, Technicolor, which is a media and entertainment 3PL to the Hollywood studios and gaming organizations. And I was responsible for worldwide supply chain in both of those organizations, and did a stint with Target as well. So the impetus for me moving into academia was one where I could move from industry, bring in some experiences, and work with young people, young students, and young business leaders to get them ready for the challenges that they're going to have in the supply chain of the future. So we've been busy working on our curriculum to make sure that it supports what business partners need. We have a giant research arm, which many of you are also involved in, and I think we work jointly together across some boards and panels. And lastly, you know, we are excited about the roadmap here at the University of South Florida. The pandemic has obviously been a big hurdle, obviously, for everybody, faculty, staff, students, especially our students. Many of them have you know, had difficulty in returning to class after the pandemic started. 45% of our students are Pell Grant students. So, you know, this is a very gritty group that is, you know, working hard to, you know, help get on the map. Many of them are from first generation families who have just, you know, immigrated to the US. So there's lots going on. In terms of the post-COVID, we plan to be open in August for our fall semester in full swing here in Florida, following, you know, the state's guidelines and obviously the county guidelines. So that's sort of the, you know, 5-minute overview, if you will, of where USF is, University of South Florida, and kind of how we're dealing with the pandemic. During the course of the spring semester, we had 3 choices. Students could either do a complete virtual synchronous program. They could join in a hybrid program where we tricked out the classrooms in a technical fashion so that they could all be present in small groups if they needed to for work sessions. We limited the number that could come on campus at the time, and the classroom size was probably about 30% of what it normally is. And after a while, most of the students opted to just continue the course virtually when they knew they had the choice. But there were still some students that loved to come in and, you know, be face-to-face in person with everybody. As far as the faculty goes, mixed bag across the board. Again, many of them were teaching hybrid courses or complete virtual synchronous. We didn't have a lot of asynchronous because of the kind of discipline for making sure students are getting into their classroom, and the faculty, you know, accountability and so forth. So that gives you just a quick overview of the landscape here. Thank you, Nick.
Yep. So Elaine, as a moderator, I'm going to let you run the show with your panel in terms of the discussions and introductions, and
Great. Scott, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on at your school?
Let me get the right microphone first. So yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm Scott Grawe. I am chair of the Department of Supply Chain Management here at Iowa State University. I've been here for a little over 10, almost 11 years now. Second year as chair, or just starting my second year as chair. And yeah, we've had a lot of fun over the last year. So I'll just kind of give you a basic overview. And I don't know, we doing? I don't need slides, but we've got some slides. I can share my.
No, Scott, you're more than welcome, actually. So you should.
I've got a few, and it's just gonna, let me pull them up here. So you're gonna let me share my screen?
You should be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, down at usually at the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got it right here. So I'm gonna share mine. There we go. So you're seeing what I'm seeing. So just to kind of let everybody know where we are at pre-pandemic, I think that's important so that it puts some perspective in terms of what we did. So our model is primarily face-to-face. We've got a very heavy undergraduate focus to our programs in our College of Business, roughly 5,000 students. Within our supply chain major, we've got about 500 students. That largely just includes juniors and seniors with a scattering of a few sophomores. Most of our freshmen and sophomores are considered pre-business and therefore don't have a major declared. And our supply chain curriculum is largely set up with lecture-based courses, a significant experiential learning component, and then a study abroad elective component. It's not required, but we do try and get a lot of students engaged in our study abroad. So, and from a lecture standpoint in supply chain, 20 to 75 students per course. The 75 student courses are really just a handful of our intro to supply chain courses. We try and break that up into several smaller sections. So we're generally looking at about 45 to 50 students on average per course. So what do we do when we hit the pandemic? So what we did was we moved all of our large sections. So any course that had over 150 students, we moved 100% online, which didn't impact any of our supply chain courses. All rooms were capped at 50% capacity. And this is for the fall. In the spring, when the pandemic hit, like most other people, we just asked everybody to stay home at spring break and not come back. We did everything online. So in the fall, we capped every room at 50% capacity. We are still at 50% capacity within each classroom. Right now, face masks are required, social distancing required. We do audio and video capture. We upgraded the audio video capabilities over last summer to make sure that we had good high quality video and audio, and it's automatic. So professors don't have to start the video recording. As soon as the class starts at each time, it's automatically recorded and automatically uploaded to Canvas. Faculty have the option to select who gets that, and they can turn off certain recordings. For example, if you gave an exam that day and you didn't actually need to capture the recording. Attendance moved from, we were encouraging attendance last fall. And this is one of the issues that we came across in supply chain. Supply chain, we generally have pretty good attendance. But the university made basically put out a statement that said, look, we're not going to be hard-nosed when it comes to requiring attendance because we don't want anybody to show up to the classroom who might not feel 100%, just in case. So all these professionalism and attendance points kind of went out the window in the fall, but this spring, so in the current semester, we are back to requiring attendance. You've got to have an excuse to not be in the classroom. Again, all you have to do is say you're not feeling well, and all of our faculty will grant that excuse. But it at least forces the students to take one more step and not just, completely shirk their classroom attendance responsibilities. We shortened our semesters. We closed all of our cafes, and we shut down a lot of our common spaces, and that remains in effect on campus right now. Most of our common spaces, we've got big stickers on seats, and we've removed tables and removed chairs in order to limit the number of people. And so we've gotten mixed reactions from students and faculty. I think the biggest reaction that I've seen to date so far is from our alumni who come back, and they bring their kids because they're trying to show off Iowa State. Hey, we want our kids are looking to go come to campus here, but the place is dead. Where is everybody? And that's probably been one of the most significant reactions that we've seen. I'm going to hold off on the looking ahead part. I'm curious to hear what everybody else is at now, but I know that I don't want to monopolize too much time right now, so I will kick it back.
Scott, thank you so much. That was great, and that was Iowa State, right?
This is at Iowa State University. So I'm going to stop my share.
How long have you been there? A little over 2 years now.
11 years.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying the program then was 2 or.
I've been department chair for about 2 years.
I got you. Okay,
yep.
Got you. Great. Thank you very much. Sue, would you like to go next? Okay.
All right. Yes, Elaine. All right. So I will share my screen here, and
I like your barn door.
oh, thank you. All right. So let's get that. Okay. So you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great. All right, so hello to everybody. I am Sue Sundar, and I am a faculty member at the University of Utah, David Eccles School of Business. And I'm also the director of the Operations and Supply Chain program here. And so thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's very, feels good to be part of this great group here and to be able to share my experiences with pre and post-COVID. How we are dealing with education here. And my slides pertain specifically to my experiences at the School of Business. And so I'm not talking about University of Utah as a whole, but more, how the David Eccles School of Business, how our program, how we dealt with COVID. So I think this picture is very familiar to all of us, especially to the faculty that is teaching in person. And I am one of the faculty that is teaching in-person classes. And the way it's worked for us is obviously we're all masked, and we do have designated spots, and they are sitting 6 feet or more apart from each other. And we go a step further where we mark, if you look at those, these are the desks and the chairs, and our classrooms pretty much look like this tiered, they're tiered classrooms. And the picture here doesn't show that. This actually picture is, it's a picture I pulled from the web, and here's a source of it's a New York Times article. And I thought this picture, I was trying to look for a picture that sort of depicts how our classrooms look like. And I thought this picture really depicted really well our situation. And the only difference is here on our right where the student is sitting on the table, we have marked numbers on there. So starting with 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so basically every student is given a number, an in-person student who decides that they want to be an in-person class gets a number, and they have to sit on their spot, on the same spot for the rest of the semester. Now, and then they also, so if this is me, at the beginning of the class, I tell them to pull out their computers or their phones, and I have an online attendance portal where I tell them to fill out their numbers on which they're sitting. So that sort of helps us to track for social distancing. if in case one of them gets infected, we're able to quickly trace and see where exactly they were sitting. And again, they are supposed to sit in the same spot in every class. So it minimizes people shifting around and choosing a different spot every time. So this is a model where we have our in-person. And the other thing that I sort of was thinking about is this new generation of college students that graduated in 2020. For them, and even for parents, and we can identify for those of us who have college-going kids or about to have kids go to college soon, like me, this is one of the big things we look forward to as a parent. It's almost like a ritual, a tradition where we want to drop off our students, and at their dream college, if they get into their dream college. But this year, you can see in 2020 and also in 2021, it's looking a little bit different. In fact, a lot different from the traditional way that we did this. And so this picture I thought depicts really well. You are being tested for your temperature right there, even before you enter. Parents are not allowed to enter the campus. They just have to do the drop-offs from outside, and pretty much everybody's masked. And there, in fact, there are certain schools that give them certain times when they can come in to campus. If they are living on campus, what times they can check into their dorms and stuff like that. So it's pretty regimented. It's pretty, as far as operations and supply chain is concerned, I think we are the people, operations supply chain people, that basically, I think if anybody, more than anyone else, to understand how can this be done in the most safe manner. All right, so I came across this article in the Harvard Business Review by Vijay and Anoop, and it talks about a post-pandemic strategy for US higher education. Now, this was written back in, in June of 2020, when we had basically just gotten into our Corona world, and we were really trying to stay afloat above water, right? Trying to get a few breaths here in, trying to stay, trying to see how can we survive as an educational institution? How can we survive this pandemic? Now, I thought their paper really, this paper in Harvard Business Review sort of spelt out one of the big concerns that universities were having across the world, across the United States. And obviously we were having budget cuts. We were also worried about how does our international student admissions, how does that change? How is that going to affect us? How are students going to, are we going to see, that a big shift in that model there? Also, we saw a large scale deferral of admissions too last year in 2020, which is affecting students this year in 2021 who are graduating from high school and applying to admissions. Those students are getting affected because we do have these students in 2020 who deferred their admissions. And obviously they're taking spots away from the 2021 cohort of students. And so that's something, and that's also a cut in in the kind of revenue that comes into our school. So that was one of the concerns that we were also worried about back in April, May, June of 2020. Also, we were wondering about financial aid. How is that going to be affected? Also, I don't know if you saw this within your universities, but we were worried about how students are going to take, and parents, not only students, but also parents, how are they going to think about paying tuition for a top school or for any school while their child is still at home? They haven't even had a chance to do the drop-off like we see in this picture. They haven't even done the drop-off. Their child is sitting there in their house, in their kitchen, and they're having to pay this huge hefty sum of tuition. And so how did parents and students react to that? And so all these were just some, and not all the concerns, but these were just a handful of concerns that we had amongst many others as educational institutions and people who are running these programs. And so I wanted to talk about, amongst many things, what kind of educational or instructional methods we had within our school. Again, within our David Eccles School of Business for our at the University of Utah. So IBC, I think at this point we all understand really well what IBC is. So IBC is where you are teaching, basically the professor is wherever they want to be, at home, in their offices, and they're teaching a bunch of students So it's pretty much a model that we're doing right now as for our meetings. So the students are all online on Zoom, but the teacher is teaching live. The professor is teaching the class live. And so this would be a picture at the bottom right is an example of an IVC class. The other option is the in-person with social distancing, and that's the picture on the right. And I myself, as the director of the program and also a professor in my school, I'm teaching both IVC classes and in-person classes with social distancing. However, I also teach classes where we have IVC and in-person both at the same time. So as I'm teaching students in the classroom, so last semester we had a model, which we moved away from this semester. So last semester we had a model in the fall where we said half the students would come in person on Tuesdays. For example, if you were teaching a Tuesday, Thursday class, we said half of them would come on Tuesdays in person and the other half would come online on Zoom. And then on Thursdays, they would switch roles and the other half would come in person and then the other half would be online. So basically they would switch roles and that got really confusing. And so we moved away from that model. And this semester, we're still doing the IVC in person, but this semester, it's clear cut, decided at the beginning of the semester that I am, student A is IVC, student B is in person. So student A always comes on IVC, for his class, and student B always comes in person. So that's the model that we're following this year. And then we have the pure online model as well, which we had before COVID. So this is something, pure online education was there before COVID happened. And I was involved in that as well as a professor. We actually have a state-of-the-art online studio right here at the David Eccles School of Business. We're really lucky to have the kind of folks that are there. They're highly talented people who help us create really world-class videos for our classes. And so I was already involved in that. And here, obviously, you don't have a live component where you see the students except for office hours or special meetings. Most of the stuff is recorded, pre-recorded. And the other thing, as Scott mentioned, on the right side here with IVC and in-person classes, we have been recording all our lectures, like Scott mentioned, and we also post them as we go on a daily basis. So they have access to the recordings to watch them and rewatch them as they want. And so, to answer the questions from that Harvard Business Review article, how much were we affected? We were pretty worried, just like any other school. How is this going to affect us? But in terms of the student credit hours, you can see here in fall 2019, this was pre-pandemic. And you can see in fall 2020 that just happened, we actually saw an increase in numbers. In spring 2020 versus spring 2021, we saw, again, increase in numbers there as well. And so, and this is for undergraduate, red is undergraduate, black is graduate programs. And you can see that we haven't seen a dip in our student credit hours due to the pandemic. Now, we don't know what the reason is. Is it because more people are going to school during a pandemic? Maybe, right? But the good news is for us, it's good news because for us, it's not the outcome that we were fearing. It's not that outcome. So we're happy about this. As far as class instruction method is concerned, I think this picture really depicts what exactly is happening as far as our delivery mode. Now, if you look at fall 2019, obviously that's clearly the pre-pandemic world, and fall 2020 is during the pandemic. Again, spring 2020, even though the pandemic started in March of 2020, our spring semester starts in January of 2020. So the spring 2020 semester, even though it starts in January, we had the pandemic happen in the middle of that semester. So we really didn't have time. I guess we did towards the last 1 month, we did move online very quickly, but this shows you at the beginning of the semester, not at the end. So you can see here our traditional mode. Red is in-person classes, black is online. You can see before the pandemic, we didn't have the concept of IVC classes. That was unheard of. We didn't have that. We didn't have hybrid classes, none of that. The only two modes of educational delivery were basically in-person classes and online classes. And what happened after the pandemic and during the pandemic, we basically now have moved to here 5 different models here. We have the online, pure online, we have the IVC hybrid, we have the IVC classes, we have the hybrid classes, and then we have the in-person classes. You can see in-person classes are really a very small component of all the classes that we are offering. And again, you can see here for both domestic and international students. Now here is another graph here for enrollment numbers. What's happening to our enrollment? Again, this was something we were worried about before we could see the numbers, but again, we were pleasantly surprised to see that we weren't, affected like we thought we would be. Again, you can see the fall undergraduate enrollment numbers have, has gone up for fall 19 to fall 2020, same thing from spring 20 to spring 2021. And right now we are in the midst of our spring 2021 semester. Same thing for our graduate programs too. So these are all good news for our program. Now let's look at the international enrollment numbers at our, again, this is just for our Eccles School of Business. It's not for the entire university. So it gives you a snapshot of our school. You can see here that the orange is the graduate students, the blue is the undergraduate students. Again, you can see the undergraduate students have been going up steadily from 2018, 19, and 20. So that has been okay here. However, for the graduate programs, we can see the international students has fallen slightly, not as much or in a big way, but a little bit, not much. Same thing you can see for fall and spring enrollment. So this sort of breaks it up there. Now I have for international student credit hours, how is that looking like? So you can see right here that the undergraduate, fall undergraduate international student credit hours between fall 2019 and fall 2020, we did see a little bit of dip there, but in spring we have bounced back for undergraduate education. We have bounced back, and I think partially the reason is that students are able to take this from their home country as well. They don't have to be physically here through the IVC classes and online. They do have that option. However, you can see for the graduate program, we do see a little bit of dip there, but in spring, you can see we have picked up. And so these are all good news. Again, I think we're happy to see that, we have not, if you go back to that Harvard Business Review article, we were worried about a lot of things. And so, and we're hoping that we can get better and better with the coming semester. All right.
Thank you, Sue. All right. I appreciate that. So we heard from Scott at Iowa State and Sue at University of Utah. And how about Elizabeth from Michigan State? Before we have any other questions, we'll come back and post some questions and we can engage in some conversation then.
Yes, hi, my name is Lizzie Fisher. I am the director of the MS program in supply chain here at Michigan State. So my presentation focuses mainly on the master's program, graduate program, some shifts we've had to make. So overall, we do cover some general thoughts as well, but mainly I will focus on that. So I have been with Michigan State now for about 4.5 years, primarily working on the master's program, also a little bit with corporate and student relations, so some experience in that undergrad sphere as well. But overview on our program, developed in 2002. It is a hybrid, mostly online. We've gone through a couple of iterations throughout its life, but we're primarily online now with face-to-face sessions. So, of course, that made our shift a little bit easier for COVID, which I will talk about. So we combine online modules and the campus. So we are 21-month format, and we are a cohort-based program. So as I said, our pivot was a little less challenging, but we did notice some major issues with admissions, some things like that, criteria, some challenges we had to overcome. And we really, it affirmed our face-to-face sessions and how valuable they were, which I think everybody is, now that we've been in this a year, the shift to online, being at home was kind of that ebb and flow, that up and down. And now everybody's ready to get back to being face-to-face. So our faculty were experienced in teaching online. Those that also taught in undergrad, I believe that made their shift a little bit easier to utilize some of the online resources, the virtual resources, where some of the other faculty in undergrad or some of the other colleges, programs may definitely had more of a challenge in that shift to online. I think as the rest of the world, the plug was pulled so fast, that pivot was quite challenging for a lot of people. Our on-campus sessions were shifted to a virtual format. We still maintained synchronous, and we partnered with a local media firm to manage the mechanics of the weekend sessions for us. So we used that hybrid. We went from that hybrid model to all online, and partnered with a media firm. So we also use the time to create some additional virtual opportunities. So we've done a lot of info sessions, our virtual sessions with our students. Again, our students are all professional. They're from all over the country and the world. So again, we're kind of used to that virtual world, but with the quickness with which the entire world went virtual and all these, everything from awards, shows, everything shifting to virtual, we took the opportunity to try to increase that engagement online. So the other major thing that we had a challenge with in the graduate sphere with our program was the communications from the university as a whole. And so as a graduate program, as a professional program, obviously we operate a little bit differently than the traditional on-site programs, on-site courses. Undergraduate programs, obviously the university as a whole, we are a very large university, we're a very traditional university, and so a lot of the decisions and the communications that came out from the university were geared towards that traditional student, and ours are not traditional students. And so that was another big challenge, was wading through the communication between what was intended for the undergrads and what was allowable in the graduate sphere. So the couple of things we noticed with some of these shifts, our fall group that started was a little bit harder of an onboarding. And so, again, I said we realized the importance of those face-to-face, and there were some very different trends with this group than we've seen with most other cohorts. There was a lot less engagement. There was a lot more repeating of information, of processes. There were a lot more questions about, courses, course content, what the online platform was. Were those things that are handled in person, when we are in person, were absorbed, I think, a lot easier. And so that was kind of a challenge, which I would assume, a lot of the undergrad faculty, in addition to the shift of operations to online, some of it is just that engagement. I think we've all realized working from home all the time, you have kids in the background, dogs in the background. Sometimes you turn your camera off and maybe multitask. And I really feel like from that perspective with our professional audience, we had a little bit of a challenge with, kind of having some more of that hand-holding going on in the program. Our outlook for 2021 for our program is we are looking to get face-to-face again as soon as possible, to re-implement those weekend sessions, to bring people to campus. Currently from MSU, of course, like the rest of the world, spring of 20, we all shifted after spring break to 100% online. Fall was pretty much the same. There was a little bit of opening up, but from Michigan's perspective, we've been a bit more of a closed down state than most. And so most of it's primarily been online. We have not had a lot of in-person instruction at the undergraduate level. Again, we're starting to open back up there, but we're really hoping that by our spring sessions, we can be face-to-face. It will be a hybrid though. I think given some of the sensitivity around COVID, there's no way to go back to 100% face-to-face right away. We've got to adjust, and we've got to have this hybrid option, and we've got to be somewhat flexible. And so that's kind of our challenge currently, is what does that hybrid version look like? Because whether it's the faculty or the students that want to be virtual, we do have to kind of manage that. We have a lot of capabilities with a facility on campus that has been working with our EMBA and has done hybrid. So they do a bit of the they have a moderator that, can help us manage the students that are online versus students that are in person. They can be a resource for the faculty that may be virtual. And so shifting from a third-party media support that has done a lot of that management for us in the online world, we're going to shift to a resource on campus that has been doing this for a couple of the other graduate programs. And then they also do it's a residency session. So we have to deal with food and beverage. We have to deal with hotel stays, and they're together for the whole weekend. So again, it's a challenge of not just an hour or two, but we're managing a 3-day session of all of these people being together. So that's kind of where we're currently at with our on the horizon of what we're managing. And so then the other longer term consideration that we are noticing that is going to definitely take some conversation is some of those admissions considerations. The biggest one being the requirement of the GMAT. Obviously the GMAT wasn't offered, or it was extremely difficult there for a lot of 2020. So we've shifted to some other testing, some other evaluation processes in place of the GMAT for the time being. And then the discussion of whether we re-implement that or whether we go with, some other form of evaluating. Of course, that has other implications, from that testing standpoint. So that's a huge kind of roundabout conversation, being an academic institution, the importance of a GMAT versus what we're evaluating and its importance to our program. The other challenge that we have had is with our international students, getting transcripts, getting credentialing. So that's been a huge challenge that has almost, railroaded some of our international students. Again, credentialing is done at the university level, not necessarily at each program, even though we do, we're the first step of review. So managing some of those international challenges, universities, countries being shut down, them wanting to do things digitally, we're really having to get creative in some of that aspect. For mostly international, because there is a credentialing question with some of the international documents. So those are just some of the admissions requirements that we're having ongoing discussions about. So last general thoughts, I think, again, this is both at undergrad and graduate level. To Sue's point, the students are not coming here. They're not getting dropped off. They're not having that dorm experience. They're questioning the tuition. All of those are conversations that are ongoing. And the virtual student engagement can be time consuming. There's a lot more individual sessions. There's the mental health that we are seeing an increase of as well, I think, both at undergraduate and graduate. Specific to our MSSCM, again, how do we manage that hybrid? At what point do we go back to a full face-to-face? Can we require it? The vaccine question is becoming a very frequent question. The requirement of vaccines at MSU, the undergrads do have a requirement to have a vaccine before coming back to campus. Of course, there's exceptions, but how does that, feed into the graduate program? How does that feed into our weekend sessions? And then we are monitoring our cohort from the fall that started completely online, what that impact has to networking. One of the benefits of a professional program is that networking. It's not just the academics. It's their, they're much less connected to each other. They're struggling a bit to figure out who to talk to. They're not getting that group interaction. And so how that affects the overall experience in the program is really important to us. And then overall, as a professional, as a graduate program, in the job market, I think we've heard it all. I know it was on the panel yesterday. I believe my colleague actually mentioned it. Supply chain is all over the news. You hear about it all the time. We were always the cog in the background that kept everything moving, but nobody actually knew what supply chain was. A lot of times it's what supply chain, and now you hear it all the time. We're frontline for everything from PPE to the vaccine rollout. And so I think of course, the job market was hit a little bit, but we are still seeing jobs postings. They're still coming through me. We're still seeing hiring. I don't think overall you know, the general area was hit like some other areas, but what does that do for the demand for our degree? You know, having those conversations in a more competitive job market for us, you know, what's the ROI of our degree versus some of the other options, certificates, things like that, you know, having a lot of conversations about long-term goals, short-term goals, and how our degree is impacted, you know, given the drastic shift in our world. So I will stop there and we can get into some of the conversations I'm assuming now, but overall, again, I'm kind of focused on the graduate area, but can definitely speak to some of the other areas as well.
Great, thanks, Lizzie or Elizabeth. Nice to see you on there, and it was a great presentation. So we do have a question from the group that says, there's more interest in hearing about the hybrid model and how that works. This question says, I found that faculty who teach in my program are very resistant to trying the approach. So anybody want to take a stab at that one? Scott, you want to take a look at that?
Sure. I think the question, I was actually watching, I think the question popped up right after Sue had been talking about her hybrid approach. And Sue, I'll let you tackle it. The only thing I'll say is, yeah, we've seen not necessarily resistance to the hybrid, but resistance from a few faculty to maybe the online part of the hybrid teaching. We got everybody up and going on the hybrid without too much trouble. It's a nice blend of the online and in-face instruction. The way we did it and the way we got people on board with it, we made it very easy. They didn't really have to do much other than, you know, record their lectures. We gave them the tools in order to record some of the lectures, so that way they didn't have to. You didn't have to repeat a lecture. I think, Sue, you mentioned that you've got students. Some students would come in on a Tuesday, then the other half would come in on a Thursday. Well, there's two different ways to do that class. You can teach the same content each time, so that each group hears the same thing when they're in the classroom. Well, when you do that, then you've got to actually create, you know, that other half of the content and develop that purely online for everybody to consume in the same way. We encourage all of our faculty to teach each time you step into the classroom, teach as if it's the same group. It's just that half of your students are going to see that same content delivered to them in person, and the other half are going to see it online, and then, you know, it'll flip later in the week. So there's different ways to do it, and we try to create options in order to make it more palatable for our faculty.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. And Sue, I know you had a nice explanation of how you guys are doing this.
Right. So thank you. So thank you to Sarah, right? Sarah asked the question. So thank you, Sarah, for asking that question. I just want to clarify, hybrid can mean a couple of things here. One, hybrid, traditionally, when we did this in fall, what hybrid meant to us was that on a Tuesday, Thursday model, half of the students will come. So if I have students numbered from, say I have 60 students in the class, the first numbered 1 to 30 would come in person on Tuesdays, and then the 1 to 30 would come online on Thursdays, and then they would flip. So 31 to 60 would come online on Tuesdays, and then they would flip and come in person on Thursdays. And so that's what hybrid was before. So the same student doesn't have the freedom or doesn't have the choice to come both Tuesdays and Thursdays. They come one day in person, one day online. Now that was quite disruptive, also trying to keep track, you know, am I going in person today? Am I going online? For the student itself, it was quite confusing. So we moved away from that model, but now we have pure in-person classes. But then at the same time, we have a cohort of online students, IVC, who are sitting there, and I'm teaching to both. So I'm teaching to students in the classroom, and I'm also teaching to students on Zoom, and it's being live relayed, right, telecasted, and I'm standing in front of my computer in the podium in the classroom so they can see me up close. Obviously I have a mask, so that makes a difference. When you have a mask, you know, you don't, you miss some of that, you know, the connection when they can't see you smile and all that, but it is what it is. But going back to Sarah's point, the reason you see, you know, a little bit of reluctance from faculty in doing that is it is hard. It's not easy. Either you teach a traditional in-person class. I mean, teaching in a mask itself, it's hard. Talking for 3 hours or 2 hours in a mask. And I feel like we lose the connection because there you have the students in a mask, you have yourself in a mask, they can't even see you smile, nothing. It just seems, and also talking with the mask on for hours at end just makes it difficult. And if you add a component of hybrid to that, where you have to manage an online group of students at the same time, manage a chat component at the same time, it does make it more complicated. So I completely agree with your faculty who are pushing back on that it is not the ideal situation. So if you could pick one over the other as pure mediums of delivery, you could say that, hey, we do IVC or we do in person, and you're able to choose one or the other and not mix them. That would be the best in terms of, for the faculty, in terms of being able to focus on one kind of delivery. But like I said, I am doing this delivery where I'm doing both at the same time, because that's what the need is for the hour. And so I'm adapting myself to the need, whatever is needed for right now. But yes, it's not the best, but it is what it is.
Thank you very much. That was great. So I have a question. I can probably count 50 times over the last, fall and spring semester where students, from a student perspective, there was a great deal of frustration in terms of the communication and getting information back from faculty members and so forth and so on. Does anyone want to take a stab at, what challenges you had with students? It was horrible because our students were trying so hard to get things answered. And I think the faculty was in a position where this was also new. There's so many, things that can fall through the cracks. How did you guys smooth that over, and how did you bring everybody together? Or were you able to, or just talk a little bit about that? Is there anyone who wants to, maybe Lizzie, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think, overall communications of patients as we were all wading through all of this from the undergraduate, the graduate level, as I said, that virtual arena is actually very time consuming from that perspective, because you're fielding so many individual conversations, maybe individual Zooms. From our program, and I would say this is overall outside of COVID too, and maybe it was just a bit more of a reactive mode as opposed to preemptive like we've been in the past, but we set expectations, up front. It was learning, as we progressed each semester, and this didn't, I think when this all started a year ago, everybody was hopeful it was a few months and we'd come out of it. And then, here we are in fall in it again. Now here we are in spring doing it again, hopefully coming out of it, but there's no firm, we're not saying that 100% yet. And so I think as we've progressed, setting expectations up front as much as possible, and sometimes the reality is it's sometimes you can't fix it, sometimes you can, and kind of realizing that in this world was important too. But I would say, everybody's been dealing with an increase in emails, and handling it at the group level as much as possible. I don't teach an individual course, so I can't weigh in on that. Maybe Scott or Sue can, but I would say from a program management in the larger group, one of the things we have done to support faculty is kind of setting those expectations. And if something does come up, and even though it's reactive, is getting it out in front of the group as quickly as possible so that we can kind of, cut it off quickly.
Sue or Scott, anything you want to weigh in? Scott, go for it.
So real quickly, the only thing that we did was we encouraged the adoption of a template and consistency. I saw this with my own kids in middle school and high school. They're all in the same school building, but from teacher to teacher, you'd have homework posted in a place that's completely different than where the lecture material is, from where something else is, and it's going to vary from instructor to instructor. You see it at the K through 12 level, you see it at the college level as well, and you've got various levels of comfort among faculty with regard to using some of the online tools. we flip the switch, we say, everybody's got to do it. Some people put a ton of time and energy into doing it. Others, it was, I just need to do enough to get by. This is temporary. I'll be back to, teaching face-to-face later on. So that consistency really created some problems for the students. And, getting the students, getting our faculty to buy into a more consistent template as they develop their hybrid and online courses really helped us to, to serve the needs of the students.
Excellent. Thank you. Going on, just kind of switching gears for a second, I'm curious how you guys are, what you're hearing from your business partners. What is going on out there in your community that is going to change some of the trends or the outlooks that you have on the educational program? Are there things that have come out of the pandemic that are giant ahas that are kind of filtering around your community saying, we need to do this differently, or we need to do that differently? And if so, what are they? I'd love to just kind of hear about that and explore that a little bit.
I mean, I'd be happy to jump in on that real quick. So one of the things that we've heard loud and clear from some of the business partners that we work with is that as frustrating as it can be and as much fatigue as you can gain from being on Zoom and so forth, it's a way of doing business. So I talked with a partner who's with a major retailer who said, look, this is a skill set that we're looking for now. Your ability to engage with, manage, and run a Zoom meeting or virtual meeting is something that they're going to evaluate you on now. So you need to be able to learn how to do it. So we've actually started including some of these skills and evaluating some of these skills in a few of our classes. We're not doing it in all of our classes, but we've got a couple faculty who have basically jumped up and said, you know what, I'm going to evaluate your Zoom etiquette and your Zoom skills as part of your grade. We've also heard from some of our business partners that you can't ignore the pandemic from a curricular standpoint. So we have to be talking about this in our classes. So if you're teaching inventory management, or you're teaching global logistics, or you're teaching warehousing, okay, let's talk about the pandemic impact on each one of these concepts. Throw the textbook out the window. Nobody cares about what the textbook says. Well, they do, I shouldn't say that. But let's apply these concepts specifically to the current environment. And we do a lot of that through experiential learning. 90% of our courses have some sort of experiential learning component to it. And our ability to really pull the pandemic and the pandemic impacts into these courses has actually improved significantly with the pandemic, because now instead of having that kickoff meeting with the company at the beginning of the semester, maybe a check-in halfway through, and then you've got your presentations at the end, our students are meeting weekly with their key contacts at the experiential learning partner in ways that they hadn't done before, just because now they're more used to using some of these virtual meeting tools. So I think these skills that we're developing are going to be important going forward. We're not going to get past the Zoom WebEx thing. It's going to be with us, and it's going to change the way we do business.
I think I agree with Scott there. I think we've changed the culture, right, of education. I think we've changed it, and also we've changed the expectations that students have. Before Corona, if you missed a class as a student, you missed it, right? You asked your friend for notes. Now, I think even after COVID goes away, the one thing that I'm betting on is that they will expect the video to be there. Even after COVID's gone, they'll expect that, if I have a doctor's appointment, if I can't come to class, the professor needs to have that video taped and uploaded for me so I can watch it at my convenience. So that's one of the, and then, I think for us as faculty, going back to Scott and Lizzie's point, laying down the expectations is so much more important today than ever. And sometimes we as faculty find it difficult to, and I have professionalism as a big part of my grade, and which has been very easy for me in the past, but this semester, with COVID, I mean, both the semesters with COVID, it's been more difficult to grade as a component, especially when we say that, we do have to give them the flexibility that if they can't come, and then how do I do the grading and be also consistent?
I would say that, kind of again, on both of what Sue and Scott said, some of the, I guess, different areas of the university, different programs, being a professional program, being a graduate program, being an online program, it was a bit easier for us to adapt to this shift. A lot of people around us, a lot of University of Operations have always dug their heels in when it comes to, moving into a virtual world, moving into, coming from a large university where undergraduate's entirely ground-based, that's the majority of our population. There were still processes from whether that was, general university down to, some of our counterparts across campus. And I think looking at how everybody shifted, and it sort of forced all of these areas that were hesitant to come around to, where a lot of industry and corporate are, where, there was a flexibility to work from home. There was everything done online. You had the calendar, the email, the email calendars, all those sorts of things, which we use, but there was still, when we had that big shift and the faculty, some of them used our D2L, our online platforms, as document repositories, not to the full capability of what it was. And so I think one of the big aha things that I watched happen around me, not so much for our program, but was this push that everybody had to come up to speed immediately. Everybody had to do it. Everybody had to, to raise the bar on virtual operations. And, the expectations were high of everybody else, at least from the graduate. Again, you're professional, they're in industry, they're out there dealing with a lot of the Zoom, probably a small portion of our faculty and students had used Zoom to its full capability. And, again, like Scott said, it's not going anywhere, and everybody just had to dive in and use it. And then you're sitting on Zoom all day long.
Right.
So I think the big aha moment was, as much as my program specifically was kind of up to par in that virtual world, but watching everybody else just be, literally thrown in the middle of the ocean to fend for yourselves in the virtual world. And that goes from everything from the individual class experience to overall university operations, the speed with which everybody had to change, even from an administrative perspective, was just, it really forced people out of their comfort zone.
It was lightning speed, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was overnight. And, at University of South Florida, we were also going through a 3-campus consolidation at the same time. So we were getting Canvas tricked out the way it needed to be for all the hybrid teaching, but then also trying to consolidate 3 different colleges of business into one, 3 different colleges of IT into one, et cetera, et cetera. So congratulations on you who have had an online presence for a long time, because that seems to be one of the themes. Shifting gears, a little bit of a question we've got a question from Bradley Fueling, and he says here, with the global nature of supply chains, can perspectives be shared on how faculty are thinking about incorporating global insights into the classroom? Maybe the current adjustment to virtual hybrid has taken time, so are there thoughts on how global opportunities will be integrated going forward, or alternatively, maybe localization of supply chains is returning, and the question may be bringing localized adaptation into the classroom? What a great loaded question. And I think it's incredibly timely, because there are so many discussions going on right now about what's the next China. Florida thinks they're China +1. So there's all of that going on. What do you guys think? What's happening out there? And are we going to see less emphasis on global and more on localization? And how is that being integrated into the classroom? Sue, I'm calling on you.
Sure. So this is a great question, Bradley. And I agree with Elaine there. And one of the things that we are doing that, because we actually are very unique in our program, So I teach both the master's and the undergraduate level. But at the undergraduate level, we have something called a capstone project. It's a capstone course where our students, all of the graduating seniors in our program, have to work one semester with a real company. And usually we choose an international company that has a presence right here in Utah. And it can be a healthcare company, it can be a food and beverage company, it can be a tech company. We have a lot of companies right here in Utah. We're pretty lucky that way. And so we're doing exactly that, what Bradley's asking. So we have put students into these groups and cohorts of students at these companies, a group of 4 to 5 students, and they're studying these real supply chain issues with these top beverage companies, and without naming them, but they're right here in Utah, and or healthcare companies, hospitals. How are we dealing with supply chains for a hospital? And they're working on a project right now as we speak. Should we be depending on more local suppliers? Should we be depending more on our traditional suppliers that we had before? So these are all the questions that we're asking, and they're getting answered by the companies, between the companies and students, by actually going. And again, we haven't been able to go there in person all the time. So we're doing a lot of those capstone projects virtually on Zoom. And then once in a while, we do social distancing and then visit the campus for the company as well. But that's how we are answering our questions.
That's great. Lizzie, Scott?
I for one will say I can't wait to start taking my students back overseas again. So in terms of that globalization, we'll always continue to, because it is about supply chain, but it's also about learning the culture, how to do business, how to engage, with people from different backgrounds and various parts of the world. So I'll answer this in a couple different ways. So first, getting global perspectives. One of the things that we've seen some of our faculty do is they will bring in guest lectures from all over the globe because it's easy with Zoom. We do this in our PhD courses. So this has been one of the great advancements. So it's not just, hey, let's read through these articles and talk through some of the research, but let's bring in the faculty, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in Asia, or whether they're just across the country. So they'll actually come into virtually into some of these doctoral seminars for teaching, which is great. We've got an EMBA program where there's an international travel component to that every year. We couldn't go to Europe this year. We felt very strongly that we still needed to show some level of international transportation, international logistics component to it. So we're going to Hawaii. There's plenty of operation. It's got an ag focus to the program, so we can go there. We can see some of the ag resources in Hawaii. We can see port operations in Hawaii. Yes, it's not another country, but it does give them a little bit of a feel for what port operations are like. And being in the middle of Iowa, we don't have gantry cranes and ocean containers right outside our window. So we look for opportunities to do this. We're going to continue to look for them as soon as we can get overseas. We're going to do that, but we're not slowing down in terms of bringing in global perspectives in any way that we can.
So I'll kind of echo Scott's, thought that globalization is always going to be important. It is, sprinkled throughout our courses, both undergraduate and graduate level. I think the interesting comment was, is it globalization, or on the flip side, is it localization of sourcing and things like that? And I think that, again, I'm not an instructor of individual courses, but looking at a program overall, looking at course development, keeping our content fresh, innovative, relevant. We haven't had, there's been different, whether it's a tsunami, a flood, a hurricane, there's been isolated impacts to the supply chain, where you have to handle it in a given area, maybe a single supplier. Having the entire world go through a global pandemic has changed perspectives a lot. And I think from a very micro perspective, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months, and we're all kind of waiting week by week to decide. And I think overall, one thing we preach is flexibility in supply chains, adaptability. Do you sole source? Do you offshore, reshore? What's the trend of the time, right? And I don't think, given right now, everything's kind of shut down. So of course you have to have a bit more local perspective. But from a classroom content, of course, we have the globalization, the international component to our cohorts is very important in the master's program. But, in the classroom and I guess in general supply chain, that flexibility and that adaptability is important. So, from a content standpoint, with our courses in the master's program, you're always going to have the foundation of supply chain, the main points that you teach, but there's always going to be that portion that is left flexible. And if that's in the online world, doing live sessions, Zoom sessions, or just a portion of the content, if we, get back to the traditional offerings of that part of the class that can change regularly depending on how things change. And I think that adaptability, because you could talk both sides right now, the globalization or the localization, and it was brought up in the question. So you've got to be able to kind of pivot. And everybody had to pivot in the global pandemic. Again, it wasn't just one area. So I think that having that flexibility in the classroom, like we preach in the supply chains, is extremely important.
That's great. And, I'm curious too, we've talked a lot about the adaptability and, being able to talk out of both sides of our mouth, globalization, localization, and all that. But what are your business partners really doing? Have any of them really made a significant shift from a global, strategy to one that is more localized? I'm not seeing it, but maybe others are. I'm just curious. Any thoughts on that from business partners? Are they really going to make that shift, or are they too embedded in China or other places where they're sourcing, and maybe they've already made the shift from China somewhere else, so they're not going to localize? I'm just curious what you're hearing out there.
I don't think it's as large scale as some might have you believe. As I've talked to different business partners, they've moved inventory around, and they've brought on additional suppliers and created a more diverse supply base, and a more nimble, flexible supply chain, but not necessarily dropping other suppliers wholesale in order to create a more localized supply chain. I think what you're seeing, at least what I'm seeing in the examples that I've been following, is a more diversified supply chain that allows for more flexibility, in the event that you do come across disruptions.
That's great.
So,
And one other quick question. Oh, Nick, go ahead.
No. I was just going to mention that just before our call today, I actually was talking to the chairman of Intermodal Group, the largest. They actually represent rail, the 3PL, the freight forwarders, and if you look at just the data and you take away all the noise on the political spectrum, the fact is we have this year, we just posted this morning, the largest trade deficit, right? And this is true for the data coming out of our side, as well as Southeast Asia, India subcontinent. China has really rebounded in a greater way, 6% GDP growth under a pandemic, where the rest of the world, we're struggling to barely touch in a positive territory. So to answer your question, I think, and I've written substantially about the decoupling of supply chain, I think it's easier said than done. There is just so much anxiety because A, how do you do it? And B, we don't have an infrastructure to support industries to come back in a happier way. Look, we talk about infrastructure spending, building infrastructure, promoting this business. We talked about yesterday the human capital, all of these things businesses would need. So it's not like you can shut something down and just pitch a tent and start producing these things. There's a huge transformation that needs to occur. And I have a feeling that unless we as a country, we as a society really commit to this and help industry really build through and go through this process in a systemic way, I think it'll be very tough for us to decouple out of what we are so used to it for the last 25 years.
I think that's exactly right. The other thing that I think you can't lose sight of is there's also a lot of innovation that's coming out of China as well. So it's not just, hey, they're producing the stuff that the rest of the world is inventing and so forth. There's stuff that's being invented and developed and innovation coming out of China. So that really does, it creates a much different scenario than what we were looking at, decades ago.
Great. So, kind of bringing that kind of home again, what are you seeing in the classroom as it relates to, this whole discussion around adaptability, shifting, globalization, localization? Some of it wasn't necessarily related to a globalization factor or a localization factor, but some of it was, some of the challenges were the way in which products were presented, right? The toilet paper, the food, restaurant food, and things like that. So you've got wholesale packaging, you've got consumer packaging. And so how is that being represented? And because that's probably one of the biggest challenges. It wasn't that there wasn't supply of the stuff. It was that restaurants didn't need it because they were closing, and consumers did need it because they were opening up shop at home. So how did that play out in the classroom and with the curriculum and faculty engaging, with case studies relative to this whole adaptability shift that's not necessarily related to globalization and localization?
I can answer a little bit to that.
I love it, Sue. Go for it.
So I think here, one of the things that we need to do is we need to have this learning to be collaborative, right? So, and we need to learn in real time. So we don't have a textbook to answer Elaine's question there. No textbook will cover what she just asked. And so we have to devise a plan of how to teach that. And so the way I do it is, obviously, as I'm reading the news for the day in the morning, Wall Street Journal, and so on, I'm picking up news for the day and posting that live on Canvas. And I ask my students to do the same thing because they get participation points if they pick up news items from that day or from that week, which is relevant to our class and the principles of Operation Supply Chain, then they get points. And it's been amazing how when you reward them for the right behavior, I've had so many students bring up so many cool articles. Sometimes these are articles that we as professors may have also missed because they have other platforms, where we are not there. For example, I've had students share things on Instagram and they pull up articles, that was shared there. And it's very much relevant to our class here because we're talking about these principles of supply chain and operations of these businesses. And, how did this healthcare company deal with, the shortage of this item that was there? It was coming from China and so on. And so, and right away, I'm able to, share that with my class on Canvas, and we all learn together, helping each other. But that has been my focus, especially more now with COVID, is to find relevant articles on a daily basis, literally, and on a weekly basis to see what is it from this week that I can show, even government-wise, what has the government come up with in terms of regulations, in terms of restrictions, in terms of taxations. How is that affecting our supply chain? How are companies dealing with it? So is there an article that PepsiCo did? How are they dealing with, and there have been articles on PepsiCo and Coca-Cola. How are they dealing with, because there were certain ingredients that Coca-Cola and PepsiCo use in their food products and beverages that actually comes from China. And right when this COVID happened, how are they dealing with this key ingredient that is coming from China and that they don't know how things are going to pan out? And so I think that's one way of sort of understanding how to deal with this evolving situation and still learning from that positively.
Right. That's excellent. And Lizzie, anything from Michigan State in that regard?
I would say, similar to what Sue said, what I've seen for some some of our courses is that relevant article. You know, I mean, we had a faculty in the master's program that was posting articles that were published, 2 days prior, that were, guiding the conversations for the whole week. So I think it's not a textbook, it is an article, it's YouTube videos, it's, case studies. If you look at some of the, you talk about change management, you look at some of the companies that have shifted or failed and why they failed, and what's the next shift there, and I think that what we're seeing right now, and again, it'll be a little while before there's maybe published case studies or research, but those that had embraced, again, similar to kind of what I said earlier about the universities, but the companies that embrace the online, the direct shipment to the homes, those that are flourishing now, as opposed to those that were maybe a bit hesitant, and then you hit COVID and a lot of them went under. And so I think looking at it just kind of from a change management perspective is going to be important. And what has progressively caused disruptions, what has overall, and not even just from a supply chain perspective though, but how do you do the risk management? How do you manage all of that? And I think for a while, at least in regards to COVID, it's going to be those immediate resources, the articles, the things like that, until there's a bit more published items behind it.
Excellent. Any other comments around that? How about the situation with, are you bringing into the classroom the impacts on e-commerce and the waste? What's happening with the waste? Has that come up in any of your faculty, curriculum sessions or business partner meetings, where how are we going to deal with this? It's like Sue said, it's a new real-time problem that, we sort of should have anticipated. Any type of an uptick in e-commerce is going to create all the, the waste and other things that have exponentially increased over the last 10 years. Any of that coming into play as you're developing curriculum and shifting on the fly and being agile?
Yeah, I mean, like any of these topics, we're talking to our business partners about them and helping them, solve any issues that they can. A lot of these have kind of fed into some research projects. I know that, from an e-commerce perspective, we've got a couple faculty working with some 3PLs and some retailers on some of their online strategy. How are you going about meeting the needs of the customer? Do we see this? And we saw this, one of the graphics in the presentation that Dana put together earlier today with regard to e-commerce and the consumer participation in this final yard delivery to customers and potential waste and so forth. So yeah, in terms of the question about do we have it ingrained in our curriculum yet? I'll answer that only by saying the guidance that we tend to, we did have a meeting. We meet as a faculty on a monthly basis within our supply chain group. And the mantra that we tend to have is, look, we need to make sure that our students have the knowledge that they need in order to stay ahead of the next disruption. We don't know what it's going to be. It's hard to predict what that's going to be. Nobody saw the pandemic coming. So we just need to equip them. And if we can pull examples from the e-commerce world, from some other world that's going to help us teach our students and work through that, we're certainly going to do that. And again, we always try and do it with some sort of experiential component to it if we can get one of our business partners online with helping us out, which fortunately we've got a good group working with us to do that.
That's great. So
Hey,
last
Elaine,
question.
can I ask a quick question?
Sure, Nick.
So to all of you guys, and this is also open to the others, but as we do this asynchronous classroom and flipped classroom, has the conversation evolved into the faculty workload and the compensation? Should it be the same as the face-to-face, or is that different? Because I think if you think about what the keynote Dr. Kumar was talking about, the flipped classrooms and peer-to-peer, and then the bifurcating the faculty interaction as a separate component. My question to him offline was, will that factor into the faculty load, and how would that calculation be? And he says, well, that is the big elephant in the room. I just wanted to gain your perspective. Has that come up? And Scott, I'll start with you as a chair. Have you thought about the flipped classroom, and then we'll go around, whoever else wants to jump in.
So I'll answer that a couple different ways. And most of you probably are paying no attention to what's going on in news in Iowa, but I'll tell you what, I mean, so we're a state institution. So as a state institution, we've got elected officials who like to pay attention to the things that we're doing. So right now there's a bill that's gaining more momentum than it's ever gained before to eliminate tenure. Is it going to pass? Likely no. But that kind of gives you an idea of where our elected leaders are. But the other thing that they're looking at is the learning that's taking place. So most people across the country have, you know, you've seen on the news and from elected officials, we've got to get our students, K through 12 students, back into schools, get them out of the online environment. You've got to get them back into schools. Well, here the language extends from K through PhD. Why do we have so many courses at the 3 Regents institutions being taught online or hybrid? We need our students back in the classroom. So when it comes to the faculty pay, and should we be, you know, providing more resources to the faculty to do this? Yes, it's come up. Yes, we've found ways, and mainly what we've been doing is investing in the resources. You need help from an instructional designer, we'll find the funding, and we'll hire an instructional designer so you don't have to figure everything out on your own. You know, we have in some cases put together you know, course development funding. If you really have to go out and come up with brand new content in a brand new way of delivering the content in the current area. But is there state support for paying faculty more for developing online and hybrid courses? No, but as someone who's actually doing it myself, yeah, I certainly do feel the you know, the additional hours and expectations tied in with that. The only compensation that's been provided at Iowa State, and I think it's been the same at others, is a tenure clock extension. So, hey, you know, we understand you're going to be spending a lot of time doing this. We understand that you're going to be probably sacrificing some of your research time to do this. So there are tenure clock extensions available from a blanket standpoint.
Anybody
I'll
else? Yeah, great question, and thank you, Scott.
So I can weigh in a little bit, being again on a master's program, a primarily online program. We at the master's level for our program work with an OPM. We do course development for online. There is an additional payment model that goes along with that for a course development, a redevelopment, with the thought that that's done every, you know, 3 to 5 years, depending on the course content. So the actual online pieces of it are developed, you know, in a schedule, and there's an additional payment model there. Now, at the master's level, being a revenue-based initiative, we have number one had that model since going online in 2015, or shifting to primarily online and working with an OPM. We have other you know, third-party expertise, you know, in that media group I talked about. Now some of our on-campus resources have shifted and can be a resource for that. And I think we have had the great luxury of taking advantage of that, being a master's program and being a revenue-based initiative. Talking to a lot of my colleagues that teach, the faculty, you know, the shift to online, the management of the students online, the online, asynchronous and synchronous management for what they're going through is a lot more work than anybody ever expected. You know, and in talking to them, I hear it all the time, it's very hard to hear how much more time they're putting in, you know, when the idea is that online is easier. You know, you don't pay them more, online's easier, don't complain. Well, running a master's program that's online, having to shift to a little bit of face-to-face we have, I understand 100% that the online portion is not easy to manage. The shift is not easy to manage, you know, from a workload standpoint. I think the bigger piece of it that, you know, a lot of people may take for granted is that it's not cheap either. The cost to develop these courses, the cost to do, you know, instructional design, to use maybe a media expert to do the videos, that all comes at a hefty cost. So this idea, you know, we've been constantly shifted or pushed in the master's program to shift to an entirely online, right? It's supposed to be less expensive. The overhead's less. We'll increase our revenue because online is cheaper. Well, if you're engaging, if you are really developing, you know, a product that stands apart from the rest of them, it's not cheap. It's quite expensive. And so I think, again, from the master's perspective, we've done well at that. We've worked with an OPM. You know, we rely on our program for those dollars, and that's kind of a luxury we have. I would say that on the shift side of that, at the undergrad level, you know, the big conversation I think everybody is having right now is funding challenges. You know, Sue brought it up at the very beginning. Students and parents don't want to pay full tuition if they're not getting that full college experience, you know, and so you kind of have that other side of it where I don't know if those conversations have come up on a larger scale outside of, you know, my program specifically at the master's level, but it absolutely is more work. It's more money. On the flip side of it, the universities are facing extreme funding challenges, you know, so what other creative ways do you bring in dollars? Do you do that kind of stuff? So I think it's a very interesting question, Nick, and I don't know what we're doing at the undergrad level, but I absolutely can commiserate as to how much work it is for the faculty, you know, and again, what I've gone through with our program.
Excellent. All right, so we're coming to the top of the hour here, Nick, and I want to thank Scott, Sue, and Lizzie for a fantastic discussion. And I got to tell you, I learned so much. Just kind of, I had to go on silent to jot down notes, you know, because I was afraid I wouldn't have my head up here. So thank you so much. You guys really provided a wealth of information around the horn. And Nick, thanks. I appreciate the time to be able to talk about these things.
No, thank you. Thank you, Scott, Lizzie, Elaine, and Sue. Thank you. Very well done.